there! My name is JC Ells, and we will be talking about what dyslexia looks like in the secondary classroom, as well as ways we, as teachers, can help our students struggling with dyslexia. Here I give you two myths and a truth. Which one do you think is true? 1. Dyslexia cannot be diagnosed until the 3rd grade. 2. 15 to 20% of the population has dyslexia. Or 3, dyslexic children just aren't as smart as typical children. Take 30 seconds to discuss these options with your table partner. Five more seconds. All right, which one do you think it is? It's number 2. 15 to 20% of the population has dyslexia. It's no small number when we consider the size of our classrooms. One myth we need to look at is that dyslexia can't be diagnosed until the 3rd grade. It actually can be seen as early as kindergarten. Another myth is that dyslexic children just aren't as smart as typical children. That is across the board not true. Miss Ells, you might be thinking, but I thought that dyslexic children stand a better chance of dropping out of school and have a much higher chance of ending up in prison. Doesn't intelligence have some bearing on those choices? To that I say, you're right, sort of. They do have a higher chance of both, but the why has nothing to do with intelligence and more to do with the shame behind having dyslexia, which I will talk more about later. What is dyslexia? First, let's take a look at what dyslexia is at its core. One thing we need to remember is that it's hard to find agreement in the scientific community as to what causes dyslexia and how it manifests routinely. Here we will discuss some of the most agreed upon symptoms of presenting dyslexia. Then we'll move on to what stealth dyslexia may look like. Here are the facts. 1. Dyslexia is a learning disability. It's not something that a child chooses to have, or the child is just lazy and is something that can easily be fixed. 2. Dyslexic children are typically average, if not above average, in intelligence. Dyslexic children are often found on the gifted children lists. 3. There is no cure, but if caught early, it is much easier to help a child with dyslexia train their brain to combat the symptoms of dyslexia. 4. Dyslexia is often undiagnosed, more so in girls than boys, as is typical with most learning disabilities. And 5, it is often comorbid with ADHD, and because there are similar side effects, it can be difficult to separate the two and diagnose both. What are some of the symptoms of dyslexia? There's a whole range of symptoms that can manifest as a result of dyslexia. General problems may include, but are not limited to, learning to speak, learning letters and their sounds, organizing written and spoken language, memorizing number facts, reading quickly enough to comprehend, keeping up with and comprehending longer reading assignments, spelling, learning a foreign language, and correctly doing math operations. Now, what is stealth dyslexia? Stealth dyslexia is the wonderful variation of dyslexia that makes it even harder to diagnose and treat. These children typically have average or above average reading comprehension scores, yet still have many of the signs of dyslexia. Some symptoms of stealth dyslexia include characteristic dyslexic difficulties with word processing and written output, findings on neurological and neuropsychological testing consistent with the auditory, visual, language, and motor processing deficits characteristic of dyslexia, reading skills that appear to fall within the normal or even superior range for children their age, at least on silent reading comprehension. In addition, many of these children may have a family history of dyslexia. Two major typical characteristics in children with stealth dyslexia are dysgraphia and dyspraxia. That is, children with stealth dyslexia have a hard time turning words in their head into symbols on a page. They know what they want to write, but they simply cannot make their hands do what they want. What causes dyslexia? By and large, scientists have no idea. Some theorize it may be something to do with visual deformities. Others think it may be the way brains recognize patterns. But so far, there has yet to be any sort of general consensus on what the specific causes of dyslexia are. How about shame in dyslexia? Dr. Gershon Kaufman is a renowned psychologist who has spent his career studying what causes shame and what the effects of that shame are. He has found that people who cannot read or who struggle to learn to read experience the same amount of shame as someone who has engaged in an incestuous relationship. One thing many educators fail to realize is how traumatic not being neurotypical can be for children, which is why trauma-informed pedagogy is vital to help dyslexic students be successful. But there are some upsides. Dyslexic children have a number of unique strengths. People with dyslexia are more creative, they are more mechanical and tend to think more in 3 dimensions than 2. They are much better at making connections, which leads them to be excellent storytellers, and they are more likely to find unique solutions to problems they are presented with. Because of this, they are much more likely to be entrepreneurs and inventors than the average person. Who are some famous people who have dyslexia? There have been many famous and talented dyslexics throughout history, like director Steven Spielberg and basketball player Magic Johnson. Artist Pablo Picasso's ability to see in 3 dimensions gave his paintings a unique perspective. Paleontologist Jack Horner likes to exclaim that he has now written more books than he has read, and that dyslexia has never stopped him from being the most famous paleontologist we have around. Dyslexia comes with as many advantages as it does disadvantages. What does dyslexia look like in high school? Undiagnosed dyslexia may manifest in a total disinterest in school. Avoidance is a learned habit for students who are struggling at something. It's often easier for them to say that they won't do something or that they hate something than admit that it is something that they struggle with. Diagnosed dyslexia can manifest in other ways, where the student may be embarrassed to admit that they have a problem and may be reluctant to ask for help. What we can do about it. I think first and foremost it is that educators need to be aware that it is much more prevalent than many of us understand. Remember that on average 1 in 5 students have some form of dyslexia. Being aware of that statistic is already helpful. We also must arm ourselves with the knowledge of how dyslexia can manifest, so we are prepared to help the student figure out strategies that may help them. Natural differentiation is another good way to help students with dyslexia without singling them out. If we have built-in scaffolding or alternate assessments, that often gives dyslexic students the support they need, even if they aren't diagnosed. Last, we need to embrace and celebrate differences. Dyslexia Awareness Week typically falls during mid-October. If we remove the stigma, we remove a lot of the shame. Next are some specific strategies you can implement in your classroom to help those students struggling with dyslexia. Strategy number 1, reading on the computer. Computers and technology are wonderful aids in the modern classroom. If you are lucky enough to have access to one or more in your classroom, here's what you can do to help your dyslexic students. You can enable a text-to-speech feature on most computers. That way the computer can read to your student to help them keep pace with the class on tasks that require reading, but the grading isn't contingent on reading ability. For tasks that are contingent on reading ability, you may download the Dyslexia font. It anchors letters and spaces them more appropriately for dyslexic brains, and allows the dyslexic student a better chance at keeping pace with reading, since the letters tend to shift less for them while using this font. How to help with dysgraphia. One simple way to help is by having access to computers and having speech-to-text features. Since the students often cannot physically create words they want to use or choose words that are easier to spell instead of the more complex words they want to use, speech-to-text could help students really demonstrate their knowledge on a subject, not just what their dyslexia allows them to demonstrate. Also, the only way to get better at something is to practice in a low-stakes environment. Having students journal daily, or at least often, and really practice making their handwriting legible is a way for them to improve on their handwriting without fear of judgment from their peers or fear of bad grades. Strategy number 3, this can be used in every content area. Any good teacher differentiates and scaffolds. But in order to make sure every student is successful, we must have to be willing to work a little harder to create assessments that have many ways for the students to show their proficiency. Although I love the easily graded multiple choice tests as much as the next person, every student has to be allowed to demonstrate their knowledge to the best of their ability. And that may not always be easy for the teacher to come up with. The previous strategies help a lot with the technical side of testing, but sometimes we have to get creative and allow our students to get creative as well. Just to recap, we can see that dyslexia is a learning disability. It's not something that the students just make up that they can easily overcome. It comes with as many strengths as it does weaknesses, and we have to be willing to harness those strengths in the classroom to make them more successful. And as teachers, there are multiple ways for us to help the student be successful in our classroom. Thank you for listening to my presentation on dyslexia in the secondary classroom. Anyone have questions? And my bibliography.